Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Greater St. Louis MGMA November 2021 webinar. Before we get started, we do have a couple of quick housekeeping items. One, all the webinar attendees are going to be in a listen-only mode. We will be using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to take questions. So please feel free to submit your questions at any time using this button during the presentation. And at the end of the speaker's formal remarks, we will address your questions at that time. And then today's webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be available with any slides on the website under the online education section of your member center. So thank you for joining us today. And our webinar is on navigating practice transitions with Dale Kryenkamp. And Dale is a healthcare human resource executive and consultant who has navigated many transitions in his career. Today, he's going to enlighten us and open our eyes to see what we haven't noticed and challenge us to think differently in the future. He will equip us with tips and tools to help dealing with transitions whenever they happen. And in the end, we will be even better and more prepared to handle the unknown challenges of tomorrow. So please join me in welcoming Dale Kryenkamp.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. And I want to start with a story about a big transition in my life. I've had many career transitions, but this one impacted me and others a little bit more. You see, I grew up in the healthcare space, and I was at a hospital. I was at a director level. And late one morning, I got a message, and the message was all director level and above leaders needed to be in the auditorium for a mandatory meeting at 2 o'clock that day. I don't know about where you work or where you've been before, but those type requests don't come very often. There was a nervous buzz as we gathered for lunch. And of course, everybody had a different opinion on what they thought was coming up. Did it impact the CEO? Was it something related to the board, new technology? Nobody knew. I got to the auditorium early because we had one of those auditoriums that if everybody showed up, it would be standing room only, and I wanted a seat. And I got there 20 minutes early, but the room was almost 3/4 of the way full at 20 minutes early. I guess I wasn't the only person that thought of that. There was still some buzz in the air, and then our CEO came in and everybody became very quiet. He went to the podium and his message was a short one. He basically said something to the effect of, I wanted to let you all know that our board has voted to merge our hospital with 2 other hospitals, and we're going to create an integrated delivery system. Now, I don't have all the answers for you about when that's going to happen because we're still working out all the details. It'll close at some point in time in the future. But I wanted you to know today because it's going to be on the news tonight. I didn't want you to be surprised. Are there any questions? Now, put yourself in that type of a room. Did I have questions? Did everybody have questions? Absolutely. Did anybody raise a hand? No. Yet tons of questions in our minds. Everybody's heart was racing a whole lot faster, trying to figure out what was this really going to mean for us? How was this going to impact us? And you see, this was a transition. And I'm using the word transition different than we often think of. We often think of change. Well, change impacts people really on an external basis rather than an internal basis. And that's the difference between change and transition. So change is my route to work has to change because there's construction and I have to go a different route. The weather changes, we change policies. Those impact us, but they don't have the same effect as a transition because a transition is a change that impacts us psychologically and emotionally. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want you to know that this time that we're together is really going to be for you. It really is, because you play a huge role in the lives of a lot of different people. And I don't know that everybody really appreciates all that you do. You've got an owner, somebody owns that practice. You've got physicians, clinical staff, support staff. You deal with patients, you deal with patients' families, vendors. They're all counting on you, even your own family. And I imagine you have days where you kind of sit there and you close your eyes like the picture of the woman on the screen and kind of go, oh my, it's quite a day. I get that you have those days, and the things that I'm going to talk about are really going to help you. So I'm going to ask you to resist the temptation, other than I know this is your lunch hour, so please eat. I want you to put your phone down, and I want you not to pay attention to email. What I have to tell you is important, and it's good. It's so good that on average, you'll look at your phone every 4.5 minutes, which means you'll look 10 times in the time we're together. I'm going to challenge, you're not going to want to look at that phone less than 4 times. This is really important. For you see, what I'm going to help you with really is going to help you fulfill the role that you already play. That's the hero. You're the superhero for a lot of people. You're the glue that holds that practice together. And this information is not only going to help you with transitions, but it's also going to help you with just understand and managing people, because we never know when the transitions are going to come. The picture that you're seeing on the screen is of a river. That's really what a transition is like. Imagine that you're on the bank to the right of the picture, and your entire team is with you. The goal is to get to the other side. That transition isn't complete until everybody gets through the river to the other side. Now, the challenge we face in a transition is something's ended that's making us navigate this water. We don't know what it's going to be like on the other side. And once we leave the bank and we're into the water, we're into the unknown. We aren't where we used to be. We aren't yet where we want to be. And we don't know what that water is going to be like. It might be shallow. It might be deep. It might have a rapid current. So getting everybody across is going to be important. And we'd love to get them all across at the same place, but I'll tell you, some people will drift down the river a little bit before they get across. You'll have people on your team who look at that transition that'll say, great, let's go. I love new things. And they're going to run into the water to try and get to the other side soon. You'll have another group of people who are close to retirement. They're kind of halfway across the river already, because no matter what happens, they're going to get to the other side because they're just finishing their time. But for everybody else, they're looking at that river and they're a little uncertain what that means. That river looks scary to them. Some people don't want to get in the water. Others are willing to start in the water, but they're going to get a little bit scared in the middle of the water, and they want to turn around and leave. Folks, that's called turnover. Turnover are people who say, I don't think so. I don't want to deal with that. We hear a lot about turnover these days with the conversation about the Great Resignation. It is happening and it's real. And the challenge with turnover is there's a law of turnover. You probably know it, but you don't say it out loud. So I'm going to tell you, that law of turnover is this. The people that you would be okay if they decided not to make the journey, if they chose not to go along, if they chose to leave, they never leave. They stay with you. They aren't going anywhere. The people you think are so valuable you don't want them to leave, those are the people that leave. We want to make sure we get everybody completely across to the other side. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is how to help you understand some tips to get your group from one side to the other. Let's talk a little bit more about transitions. And the first tip that I want to give you for this day is transitions are an emotional process. They are an emotional process, and we're not comfortable talking about emotions, but we're going to spend time talking about emotions today because that's where people are. And you need to understand it in order to help people across. So number one tip, it's emotional. Let's talk for a couple minutes about what I mean by practice transitions. If you're looking at the screen right now, what you're going to see is a continuum. It goes from left to right. The things on the far left, they impact people in your practice. So if you change the reporting relationship, that impacts the people whose reporting relationship you changed, but it really doesn't impact the whole practice. If you go further to the right, those things start to impact more and more people. And so you see at the far right, I've got a pandemic. Trust me, I know that that pandemic impacted everybody in and around your practice. I highlighted in green you, new practice manager. A change when you come into a new practice is significant for the people that are there at that practice. It's significant for everyone, and it is for you too. It's not an easy journey. This is not an exhaustive list of transitions. There are more. I just tried to pick some that I thought had the biggest impact that you might resonate with. Why do I think these transitions are coming? Well, first of all, I've been around healthcare for 40 years. And in 40 years, I've seen a lot. And I know they're coming. But I also tend to pay attention to what's going on. I'm going to share 4 numbers with you. That first number is a big number, 48,400. That's the number of physicians over the last 2 years that went from a private practice to working for a hospital healthcare system or a corporate employee, corporate entity. 20,900. Folks, that's the number of actual practices that sold to a hospital, healthcare system, or a corporate entity. 69, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but 69% of all physicians now work for a health system or a corporate employer. And 54, there was a poll recently of physicians on what was the impact of COVID for you. And here's the interesting one. 54% said COVID has changed their plans. COVID changed their plans. And the top 3 things that came up on what they're going to do differently are these. Retire. So I was going to retire down the road. I'm now retiring sooner. Second was leaving medicine altogether. The third is changing employers. So that group who said I'm changing employers basically, in essence, are saying how my employer, how my practice handled things in the transition makes me say it's time for me to go somewhere else to do something. Folks, those are the waves of change that are coming into your industry. So I know that some of these transitions are going to come. The challenge is you don't know when. And I want to prepare you for the unknown that you don't even know is really coming. And as we go through in this conversation, I'm going to open your eyes to some things, because one of the things I've learned is the eyes don't see what the brain doesn't comprehend. So I'm going to try and help you with that. I had an experience recently this summer. My wife was walking down the steps to our basement when she slipped. She quickly grabbed the railing, which is a good thing. She didn't go tumbling down to the bottom of the steps. The bad news was her right leg got caught behind the left and she dislocated her ankle. And ultimately, we learned she broke all 3 bones that support the ankle. And so she spent time, first with the leg elevated, and then when we wanted to go somewhere in a wheelchair. And that's when I began to notice things that handicapped people deal with all the time. How many handicap spaces are there? How close to the door are they? What are the handicap buttons like? And from a different vantage point, all of a sudden I began to see it everywhere. And I hope that some of what I share with you is going to help you as you move forward. The picture on the screen now is my nephew, Steve. Steve is a zookeeper. He works at the St. Louis Zoo. This picture was taken this summer with my 3 oldest grandsons, who are making faces looking like grandsons who are 8, 7, and 6 would do. Steve works in the river's edge. If you're familiar with the St. Louis Zoo and you're familiar with the river's edge, he deals with big animals. In fact, Raja is one of the elephants that he deals with all the time. Steve has to navigate and help direct Raja. The day that we were there, you can tell in this picture, Steve has Raja kind of moving 1 foot up in the air. He got Raja to do some tricks for us. But other times when he tried, Raja didn't want to have anything to do with it. Do you think Steve had any luck making Raja do what Raja didn't want to do? You're correct. That's what happens. And that's a little bit of a metaphor as we go through understanding change and transitions. Is there an emotional challenge? And so Steve's kind of like the logic side. Steve knows what needs to be done, but that's not enough to move the elephant. Those emotions are more powerful than logic. Emotions will take us places we don't necessarily want to go. Leaders sometimes don't think people should go there, but they do. Emotions are more powerful than logic. You may not realize this, but every day, over 80% of the decisions that you make are based on some sort of an emotion. Stop and think about the TV and radio ads that you see and hear during a day. Those advertisements are always going after an emotion. Why? Logic makes us think, but it's emotions that make us act. Emotions are what triggers the behavior to move people forward. It's not logic. So you can't logic people into doing things different. You can't scare people into doing things different. And you already know some examples of that. We already know that if we smoke, it's dangerous for our health. If we are overweight, it's not good for our health. It's not good for our heart. And yet people still smoke. People still are overweight. We know exercise is good, but people don't exercise. So we can understand something, but there's still something inside us that keeps us from moving forward. And it's those emotions. And today I want to help you understand those a little bit better so you can begin to see things. I was watching TV one night, and the news anchor said, "We have an amazing story for you." And that story is about a young woman who escaped an attack of a grizzly bear with only a pistol. And we're going to take you to our reporter in Northwest Canada for an exclusive interview with this young woman. The anchor cut to the reporter, who was standing with a young woman who appeared to be between 25 and maybe early 30s. And the reporter said, "Can you tell us your story? We were amazed to hear you're alive." The young woman said, "Sure." She said, "My new boyfriend and I were out walking in the woods today. And as we came over the rise, we saw these 2 cute grizzly bear cubs. They were adorable. We wanted to get pictures. But we first looked around, we didn't see anything around. We got a little closer. And we got a little closer. Just as we had squatted down to take pictures, Out of the bushes to the right, probably about 30 yards away, came Mama Grizzly Bear, and she was coming straight for us. We didn't have time to think. We couldn't react. I quickly pulled out my Beretta Jetfire pistol and I fired 2 shots right into my new boyfriend's kneecap. I moved off to the left. The bear got him. Now, the challenge with webinars is I can't see you laughing, but I know some of you are laughing or you're smiling and you're thinking to yourself, you're quite thankful that you're not the new boyfriend. And I tell that story not to get a laugh, but to bring up a point. We've known for a long time that when we are physically threatened, our brain instantly jumps into action. It's built into our DNA to protect ourselves. When there's a physical threat, the brain processes at lightning speed to help us. What we haven't understood, we've watched it, but we didn't really understand the why behind it, is that we also react in the same way when we feel emotionally threatened. And in 2008, Dr. David Rock released some new research that identified 5 domains of emotional safety. And he said, when those are triggered and perceived as a threat, that we instantly kind of want to run away. We build up a defensive mechanism to what we're seeing. Now, you've witnessed it in the workplace. Stop and think back to the time when somebody made a comment when a group of people were talking and all of a sudden somebody reacted a way nobody expected them. And they stormed out of the room and everybody looks at each other and says, boy, why was that such a big deal? Or all I said was, or what got into them? Emotional safety. It was threatened. And David Rock said there are really 5 domains that are status, certainty, autonomy, related, and fairness. And we're going to talk about those in a minute. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about them. And if you digest them and you begin to watch people, you're going to be able to see some of these elements coming to play. So the good news is I'm going to give you a model that helps you better understand what's going on. Here's the bad news. We're all different, which means what triggers somebody's emotional reaction won't trigger somebody else's. So you and I are all a little bit different. We all have these 5 domains, and they all can impact us, but there's probably 1 or 2 of them that are going to be much stronger in us. That's the challenge of being a leader. You've got different people. So let's go through those and try and understand them. And as we do that, remember one other thing. When you feel threatened, you run away. If you see something as a reward, even these 5 emotional threats, we move forward toward it. Threats, we run away. Rewards, we run toward it. So the first of those 5 domains is status. Now, whenever I talk about status, and again, we're going to do this at a very high level. We don't have enough time to dig deep on these. People will say, well, I'm not status conscious. Okay, maybe you don't drive a BMW so everybody can see that status symbol. But the reality is we all care about status. We're constantly comparing ourselves with others to see how are we doing. Status is formal and it's informal. Status is job titles. There's a perception different of somebody with the title of director than it is vice president or senior vice president. So there are formal and then there are informal. In your practice today, I imagine there are people that have skills, gifts, and abilities that are unique. Everybody knows, go to this person if you need some help with this. That's informal status. In your job, you evaluate performance. You provide feedback. That's part of what leaders do. I imagine you've got somebody on your team that when you try and provide some feedback for them to help them get better, they react negatively. They react very defensively. Folks, that's status coming into play. For you see, their perception is they're highly skilled, talented, and gifted. And when you suggest that there are ways they can get better, that's a threat to their status and how they see themselves. And that's what they're doing. They're emotionally reacting. Let's talk about the second domain, which is certainty. Certainty is a huge problem when we get into transitional times, because they're times of the unknown. We're going into that big river, and we don't know what it's going to be like on the other side, and we don't even know what the river's like. We love predictability unless we decide to change what tomorrow's going to look like. When things are uncertain, it brings about fear, anxiety, and worry for everybody. It's why rumors have life. When there is uncertainty, as a leader, you might sometimes say, why would anybody believe that? Well, we latch on to rumors because life is uncertain and we're trying to get some certainty. So that rumor has some information that makes me come to grips with what that means. Certainty is important. And the more information we can provide people, the better it's going to be. The next of the domains is autonomy. That's a sense of control over the decisions that impact our work and our life. We want to be the decision maker. Most of us don't like being told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. Our preference would be, tell me what you need done, when you need it done by, and I'll get it done. Those that have a high autonomy issue, they really struggle with micromanagement. In fact, directions that you might give, people will think of that as micromanagement. If you're new as a practice leader, one of the things that you probably do is you ask a lot of questions because you're trying to understand, how do things operate in this practice? I'm trying to understand. But when you ask questions to somebody who has an autonomy trigger, they're seeing that as potentially a way for you to take away their autonomy. Let's go to the R for relatedness. That's really about community. It's where we feel safe within our own community. And we are people who love to be in community. We need other people. New people, when they come in, we're always trying to size them up. Are they friend? Are they foe? We're trying to figure out if they fit. So when there's turnover in the community, that upsets the apple cart. If a practice chooses to lay a couple people off, that changes the dynamic. When new people come in, everybody's trying to wrestle with that, how they fit in. And the last is fairness. Everybody looks through a lens to say, did what just happened, what I just heard, is that really fair or just? I try not to load up a presentation full of athletic metaphors because I know that not everybody loves sports. But there's such a good example of the fairness that I feel the need to use it. Because we're here in St. Louis, chances are you know a little bit about Cardinal baseball. Even to the person that's not a rabid fan, you'll be aware that recently the manager was fired. Most of the buzz in the community is that was unfair. That was unjust. Why? Because we have a limited amount of information and it makes no sense based on what we know. We know that he was manager of the year 2 years ago. We know the team won 17 straight games and made the playoffs again. We like Mike Schilt. Something was going on behind the scenes that we didn't know about. And because we don't know what and why, Everybody's trying to figure it out because they're trying to determine, was this fair or just? That happens in your workplace all the time. That's why sharing information is important. The more we can share with people, the more they can evaluate and see the fairness or the justness of that decision. Tip number 2, engage your team. You need a relationship with them. That's really important, to have relationships, to know them. The challenge is they're all a little bit different. They really are. I like to think of employees like a garden full of different types of plants. Often we make the mistake in leadership of saying to people, we have to treat everybody the same. In my 40 years in human resources, I said that often. Although my focus in saying that was really about how we apply policies so that they are consistent and not discriminatory. How we treat and provide for team members what they need is a little bit different. So in that garden that I just talked about, every plant needs soil, air, water, and sunlight, but they don't need it in the same way. Let me share with you 3 examples. Let's start with a hydrangea. Hydrangeas need a lot of water. They need regular water. That's important to them. If they don't get a lot of water and regular water, they're not going to flourish. But everybody's water is going to be a little bit different. These are employees that need something from you on a regular basis. For some, it might be they need to be told they're wonderful. They need recognition. But it can be all sorts of things. I remember I had a young woman named Susie whose first job out of college was working for me. She was somebody who was really good at detail, and I liked her for that. But I learned that her water was to be needed. She needed to be needed. So she needed more work, more responsibility, more challenges. And what I found was the more that I gave her of those, the more she grew and the more she blossomed. Let's talk about a second type of plant or second type of employee. This is a succulent. Succulent comes from the cactus family. This picture of these succulents, there was a whole hillside of them on a cliff that my wife and I were visiting out in the San Diego area overlooking the ocean. Water is not a key ingredient for a succulent. If you water a succulent the way you do a hydrangea, you're going to kill it. They do with a whole lot less water because, of course, you know it never rains in Southern California. Succulents are your low maintenance team members. You've got some of those. You don't need much attention for them. They just do their job. They don't complain. Give them responsibility and let them go. The last that I want to talk about is the rose bush. I don't know about you, but I love roses. But roses are high maintenance. I suspect on your team you have some high maintenance employees. For you see, the rose bush needs not only sun, but it needs just the right amount of sun. Not too much, not too little. It needs good soil. There's a particular type of soil that'll do better. It needs water, not too little, not too much. And you need to pay constant attention to that rose bush. You got to prune it. And when you get a little bit too close to it, one of those thorns will stick you. But if you get the right ingredients and you invest in it and you prune, that rose bush produces some awesome flowers. Those high maintenance employees of yours can do some amazing work. They just need a lot of special care to get there. So that's your team. Now, how do we engage them best? That's building a relationship through conversation. One of the challenges I've found over the years for leaders is leaders have a perception that they need to know the answers to everything. And if they don't know the answers, they tend not to want to be out and among people because they're going to get asked questions. I'm going to tell you the best leaders are the leaders that are good at asking questions rather than giving answers. And that's what I want for your toolbox. I want your toolbox to be full of questions so that as you're building that relationship with folks, that you're going to be able to respond and engage in dialogue through questioning. Questions are a great equalizer for you because normally we look at leaders in a power position. I want you to get down into more of a peer position to build a relationship. When things get tough in that transition, if they have a relationship with you, you're going to be able to help move people forward where you need them to move. The lack of a relationship is a huge hindrance. So let's talk about your toolbox and some things that you might have in that toolbox. I'm going to start with some questions that I have up on the screen, and I put these in the handout also. These are some questions you can use when you see an emotional response from somebody, or somebody unexpectedly pushes back on something. These questions are a way for you to change the dialogue and learn from it. I suspect that in your career, you've seen that happen, where somebody says something like, nobody cares about patient care anymore. Nobody cares about the quality of work we do. Or you don't care about us as employees. And the instant reaction for most leaders is to jump in and say, well, that's not true. We did A, B, and C for you. We want to defend that. I'm going to encourage you to take a deep breath and use this as an opportunity to engage in some dialogue. And the opening question's a great one for you. What did you mean by that? And then listen. Let them try and expound on that. And then take it deeper. Can you give me an example? You may learn something that you didn't even know was going on that you now might need to address. And if nothing else, that you took the time to listen will help build a relationship. One of the other things that happens to us in leadership is people want to debate, or they think that the decision was a bad decision. And yet most leaders don't do things without a lot of thought. Decisions that you make are usually well thought out and well planned. So instead of defending your honor, just ask, why do you think I did that? In asking that type of a question, you'll have a better opportunity to get an answer from them. Because maybe it's just a perspective that you both need to see. Now, the second set of questions, and there's no limit on the number of questions that you can have. These are ones that have just helped before when you're trying to get to know people. When I was young in my career, when there was turnover, I always got anxious because, you know what, everything was working really well and all of a sudden somebody's going to leave, and that changes everything. But here's what I learned. Whenever we went through some type of a turnover situation and we lost some gifts of somebody on the team stepped up. I saw things in them that I didn't even know existed. And sometimes they would say to me something like, oh yeah, I've done this all the time. Nobody just notices. So one of the great questions as you're getting to know people is, what gift or talent do they have that nobody notices about them? And I put a couple of others here that I think will help you engage people in dialogue. Now, the third set of questions I'm going to show you are just those for around those times when you have to do something we leaders have to do, but don't always like to do. And that's when we have to correct somebody. Discipline, corrective action. And I find one of the biggest challenges is for us as leaders is we're so quick to get the message out because it's uncomfortable that we don't take enough time to make sure that what we've said was really heard. Imagine if you were being given corrective information about your performance, what that does. So think scarf and think about how somebody's reacting emotionally. Their brain is shutting down because their brain is trying to defend what just happened. So you need to take some time to get clarity around what you've done. And so make sure that you're getting clarity. When somebody's done something, do you even understand the impact of what you've done and how that impacts the rest of the staff or our patients? Or do you understand what I just talked to you about? Can you tell it back to me? That's part of an important dialogue that we have that makes sure that they hear. And it's also a way to show that you care, because active listening is an important way to know that people care. It's one of the great gifts that we have is somebody's going to take time to listen to what I have to say. I'm not saying you always have to agree with what somebody says, but you want to be a listener. And so if they tell you back what you said, but it's not right, you have a chance to correct it and make sure that that person walks away. Maybe you've been lucky in your career and you've never had somebody become insubordinate. I've not been so lucky. I've spent a lot of time with leaders who have dealt with insubordination. And I'm going to give you the simplest tip for dealing with that. In fact, when people have followed this tip, they don't get insubordination usually. And the tip is simple, and it's that you just basically say, I've asked you to do this. Do you understand what will happen if you don't do that? I will do this. Now, what do you want to do? Most often people might grouse about it, but they'll do what you ask them to do. Only on rare occasions will somebody be belligerent. So fill your toolbox with questions and be really good at asking them. Tip number 3, when you go through transitions, you got to communicate, communicate, communicate. In 40 plus years, I have never had an employee say to me, Mr. Krankamp, can you guys please stop communicating with us? We've heard too much. It doesn't happen. People need information in times of change. They need you to communicate with them. So it has to be frequently. It's one of the biggest mistakes that leaders often make is they make a big announcement, but then they don't fill in the blanks. They don't follow up. And that big announcement could have shaken people's emotions so that they really didn't even hear what was going on. So your communication needs to be frequent. And then you have to vary the method that you're using. We get comfortable with email because it's a great way to get information out there. You know exactly what was said. But I'll bet you have people in your practice that rarely read their email. So maybe you need to write notes to people. Maybe you need to post a note on the bulletin board. Maybe you need to kind of have a town hall for the practice where you can answer questions. Heck, it's 2021. You can take your smartphone and do a short video to everybody and zip it off. And a lot of people are going to love the video. So whatever you need to communicate in that time of change, use multiple ways of doing it. Here's the hard one. The next one, I need you to be transparent. People in times of difficulty, in times of transition, they're looking to figure out if I can trust what you have to say. Are you holding something back from me? Is there another shoe that's yet going to drop? That's what they're looking for. And so they want to know from you what's going on. And they're also wanting to understand why this is happening. And so often we don't tell the why story. We move on too quickly and we forget to explain the why. I have 3 sons, and when they were in their teenage years and we had 3 drivers, we didn't have enough cars for everybody to have a car. So when they would say, "Can I have a car to go with my friends?" If I said no, they might come back and say, "Dad, that's unfair." But I learned that when I explained why, no, there isn't a car because here are the other priorities going on in the family. It's not that they loved that they didn't get the car, but they at least understood it. They could perceive that as fair, or at least understand why we did it. The last thing I want you to begin to do is to speak to what's on their minds. Another mistake leaders make is they speak to what's on their mind. We speak big picture. We speak about what we need to know. The reality is you got to be thinking about what's on the minds of those people I'm communicating to. I have to put myself in their shoes. What do they want to know about? And sometimes it's the little details that are important. You can't forget the details. I remember one time we did an acquisition of another community in a job that I had. And the biggest question on everybody's mind was not pay, was not benefits. It was uniforms. And we were a little bit surprised by that. But what we learned was the organization had just gone through a decision on changing uniforms within the last year. And a lot of people hated the new uniforms. A lot of them loved the new uniforms. And they were all upset about having to go through a uniform conversation. So sometimes you have to deal with the little details about what it's going to be and when it's going to happen in order to calm people down. The last thing I want to share with you is really about you. It's really about how you look at what's going on. The challenge in the middle of a transition, those massive changes that are impacting people emotionally, is they're looking to know, where are their leaders in this? How are the leaders reacting? If the leader is accepting it and seeing the opportunity, it's really going to help them. It doesn't mean you will love everything that happens. But here's something I've learned out of every transition I've been through. When you're in the middle of them, they're hell. They really are. They're disorienting, they're uncomfortable, full of fear, anxiety. I can talk about emotions for the next hour about what you deal with. But here's the thing that came out of them. When I look back, the biggest growth opportunities in my career came through a transition. And I made through them when there are others that I could lean on and follow. The picture you're seeing is of the Royal Calcutta Golf Club in India. In 1829, it opened its doors. The British had colonized India and built their first golf course. They were going to have an opportunity to finally enjoy some recreation like they did back home. And as they began to play golf, while they enjoyed it, they found they became frustrated because there were animals in India that aren't on the British Isles. And so walking across the fairway might be lions and tigers, water buffaloes, elephants, monkeys. And when the monkeys found the golf ball, they grabbed the golf ball and they threw it. And you might imagine, rarely did they throw the golf ball further down the fairway. They threw it in other places. Well, the British are pretty ingenious, and they thought about this and said, we can fix that. And so they built fences down the sides of the fairways that required those big animals to have to go further down before they found a place to cross the fairway. And they thought that's going to work well. And it did, except for the monkeys, because monkeys climb. And so monkeys kept coming down into the fairway and finding the ball and throwing it. And so they were very frustrated, because there's nothing worse to a golfer than to hit a good shot and not find your golf ball there. Finally, one of the members said, let's create a local rule, and that rule is this: we'll play the ball where the monkey throws it. And once they did, everybody's attitude changed. They began to enjoy it. They began to enjoy it, and they embraced the opportunity. And that's what sometimes you need to do as a leader. You need to just play the ball where the monkey throws it. You don't get to choose everything, but you have to accept it in order to move your team on. Now, I've thrown a lot at you, and we're going to take questions in a couple minutes, but a couple things I want to share with you as we get ready to go. First of all, I'd love to be connected with you on LinkedIn. So if you've got your smartphone near you, if you'll just hover over that QR code there, it should bring me up. Please send me an invitation. I'd love to be connected with you. And if not, you'll be able to find me another way, because I'm going to move to the next slide so we can get to any questions. And that is, I do a weekly blog. Talk about leadership, talk about transitions. Would love to have you receive that blog. And when you sign up, I send you a free ebook. You can just text me your name, or you can go to my website. So your name and email, or go to my website to sign up. Whichever way, whether I sign you up or you do on your own, you're going to get a second email, so that it doesn't feel like I'm chasing you down. You're going to have to opt in, so it's a double opt-in. And then last, I'll just share all my information. If you've got questions beyond what we do today, would love to talk with you. If you have a problem, if there's a way I can help, I would love to do that. And now I'll pause and see if there are questions of any kind. And Courtney and Kate, I think that's going to leave it to you.
Yeah, so we'll open it up. So if anybody has any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit the questions. And I will pause for a few minutes and see if anybody has any.
So Courtney, I'm seeing one that came through the chat. I see one.
Yes, it says that, can you recommend any books for the group?
Yes, and actually let me get you 2 or 3 books that you can put into the notes or with this when you post it for everybody.
Okay.
Everybody's finished eating.
I think so. Well, if there are no questions, did you have anything else for us, Dale?
No, again, I hope it's helpful. I hope that now as you begin to go through and deal with your team, you're going to be able to see a little bit more and accept that many of the reactions you're getting are emotional. And that's the first key to seeing it and understanding it in order to help to begin to deal with it.
Okay. Well, that will conclude today's webinar. And we would like to thank everybody for attending. And we would also like to thank Dale for his wonderful presentation. And we hope everybody has a great day.